Good morning. All right, I figured I'd put this out there. We're not actually having class during Thanksgiving week if you look at the syllabus, but also if you look at the syllabus, we're getting pretty close to the end here. We've got this, and then we've got some review stuff, and a little time to work on your term project, and then we'll be done with this term. So, comes pretty fast. A lot of stuff going on though, and there's a lot of things that kind of fall through the cracks in terms of some of the items, the book covers and stuff, and I think there's some things that are important that you should know about, or at least be aware of when you're looking at personal finances, especially in terms of investing. I mean, we've hit it pretty hard. I know I sound kind of like not a lot of fun when I'm telling you. You need to forego, if possible. Well, it is possible. You need to get your kind of needs and wants kind of squared away, live within your means, and have excess money. It's always been true, but it's even more true now. The economy is going to be challenging. I mean, it's with AI, with some of those changes, and the sort of the wealth divide that's happened. They talk about the K-shaped economy. K-shaped economy means that, if you look at the letter K, normally, the graph goes one direction. People in general, the economy goes up or it goes down and kind of together. When they talk about K-shape, what they mean is that the upper tier, the wealthier, sure, they're direction of wealth is going in the direction of that upward part of the K, but the people that are working class are kind of in a death spiral. People who aren't holding assets, their portion is on that downward leg of the K, and as those two diverge, it's getting worse. So maybe there'll be something. I mean, I'm not a socialist, obviously, if that hasn't become clear. But I do think that we need to have more people participating, and hopefully, you're going to be one of those people. If you're holding assets, things are great. In fact, I hate to say it, but inflation is kind of like my friend right now. If inflation were to continue, well, it's not going up too fast, but if it does go up, or they devalue the money supply, deflate the money supply, it actually kind of works in my favor. If you're holding assets, the assets get more valuable in terms of dollars. And is that a reflection that the assets have changed, or is that a reflection that the dollar has just gotten that much worse? And dollar, and basically any fiat currency, fiat means, by decree. So when somebody says a dollar's worth a dollar, we're not on a gold standard or anything like that. There's nothing. The only thing standing behind it is the word of somebody. As you know, I've got a fair amount of Bitcoin, but people say, "Oh, it's not backed by anything." And what exactly is the dollar backed by? Not gold. So anyway, it gets kind of controversial, and I could lecture you all day about how don't get involved. Well, not don't get involved, but cautiously and get involved with things like cryptocurrencies and stuff. But this week, or past couple of weeks, has illustrated my point way better than I can. People got clobbered if they were kind of late to the party. If they just got involved in crypto in the past 3 months, the swings in crypto are unlike anything else in the market. So pretty exciting stuff, but definitely not the time to sell. So there's other things out there, precious metals, gold, silver. Gold used to be a no-brainer that this is just not a great asset to hold. Lately, it's got a little bit of life, but it's maybe too little, too late. It's been around forever, but it's still, in my mind, not competitive. Collectibles, very difficult to hold, store. Just making sure you have the genuine articles. But for some people, man, there are like even mutual funds. I mean, we talk about mutual funds and different types of investments. Well, they'll invest in anything. There are investments you can find right now that will give you some sort of, micro share of fine art. And sometimes that works. Speculative stocks, again, this is speculation versus investing. If you hit the one right, man, you can do quite well. For the most part, not where you want to have the large proportion of whatever wealth you're trying to accrue. Not because it's not fun, but you're probably going to lose your whatever. You may not turn out well. Probably, almost certainly will not turn out well. 9 out of 10 startups fail. Everybody's like, oh, if I would have invested in Google or Nvidia back in the day. Well, I was there, and it wasn't that obvious. I waited till they started going up a bit and then jumped in. But again, I didn't get the gains that the early adopters did. But the reason why those early adopters need the gains they do is because everything else in their portfolio, 9 out of 10, those other 9 went to nothing. So crypto, we'll talk more about that, and real estate. That is a great investment, and all these other bad things I was saying, real estate's a little sluggish, but if you look at the vast number of people who've done well without a lot of drama, without a lot of swings, just slow, methodical, there are ways to make it more exciting if that's what you're after, but that's probably not what you're after. And besides real estate, there's some enjoyment factor to it. So inflation is kind of what we're worried about, but let's say I'm holding a big real estate loan, which, well, maybe I am, and those dollars are being deflated. That means that loan that I'm going to be paying back is becoming less and less relevant. So that's nice. Gold versus the stock market. So, the blue line's the stock market, gold. So, which one do you want? It's up on a tear lately, but the market's kind of doing pretty well as well, in spite of any little drawdowns. But over the long term, one's going to get you wealthy, and one's going to, some of the reasons to hold gold would maybe be the stability and sort of that, prepper sort of mindset. But I'm just afraid if we get down to, no economy and just complete anarchy, having a gold is probably going to invite the person who has the gun to come take my gold, and that'll be that. So if you're going to have gold, you probably should have some sort of means to protect it or have it someplace. But yeah, if we're in that chaotic time, it might be time to just say, yeah, it's been a good run, and we'll see. Historical prices. So again, crypto. Here's some Magnificent Seven stocks, Google, and here's gold kind of trudging along. So S&P's kind of kicking its butt. Bonds, I hate bonds, and go figure. I wonder why. It's nothing personal, but it's just they're not doing much in dollars. So, but that, getting back to my point about what's something like, say, a Bitcoin worth. A Bitcoin's worth a Bitcoin. Always has been. It's a 1-for-1 ratio. When they say Bitcoin's worth 90,000, 100,000, or whatever, that's a reflection more upon the dollar, not the Bitcoin. Part of this has to do with the money supply, the M2, and there's a global money supply, but liquidity, and this is what causes inflation. Is there's so much money out here, there's still the same amount of stuff in the world, and so now when you got more money chasing the same amount of stuff, it's going to make that stuff worth more. Collectibles. So, skill, counterfeits. You may not think counterfeits are a big deal, but I guarantee you, I was in some of the carpets I've got from Middle East are genuine and stuff, and that's maybe more legitimate. You can look at it, and it's more apparent, what's machine made, what's man made. But Afghanistan and back to Middle East, primarily Saudi, Bahrain, places where I spend a lot of time. The gold sometimes can be, more of an alloy. And then 100% of the precious gems I took out of Afghanistan, not took, but bought. And they were shady fellows who were sending them to me, and sure enough, go figure, they're just nothing. some sort of green bottle glass, I guess. The other part about counterfeits, or not counterfeits, but collectibles, is you need two people. When somebody says, "Oh, this," because this is where I was many years ago. I was investing in the stock market, and my buddies, it was a fire squad and a bunch of different guys, and they're all buying carpets, saying, "Oh, they're going to get rich." It's like, who exactly are you going to sell these carpets to? You're going to sell them on, whatever, Craigslist at the time, or now Marketplace or something. Nobody's buying for full price. Put it on eBay. People aren't looking to spend top dollar. I had a good friend who was a Turkish guy and also sold carpets, and he gave me 3 of his Tabriz carpets. My price on them, I didn't even pay for them because I was just borrowing them, was like would have been about $300 or $400 to replace them, but they're worth probably around a couple grand in the United States each one. So I had a quick trip. I had to go to freaking New Jersey, and not a big fan of that place. So I was trying to make a best of the weekend. I was only going to be there a short time, so I took 3 of these Tabrizes. I found a big carpet, boutique kind of place. Went in there and I said, "Hey, I've got these 3 carpets. What will you give me?" And in his shop, every one of those carpets was worth about $2,000 a piece. He's like, "Yeah, wholesale on that, I can probably give you $300 or $400 a piece." So exactly what they were worth in Turkey, because this guy is in this huge, carpet thing where he's got literally thousands of carpets, and not all of them are going to sell that day. He's holding a huge inventory, so he's not buying carpet for $2,000 and selling it for $2,000. No, he's buying a carpet for $300 or $400 and sell it for $2,000, and that's how he makes his money. So anyway, and enough of that. Speculative stocks. The problem with speculative stocks is they operate in this kind of unregulated world, or that we're talking down to the penny stocks. If they're penny stocks, the reason why they're operating down there is, they'll say, "Oh, they're just new company," but it's also because they're not subject to a lot of securities exchange regulations, and so all kinds of funny things can happen, and pump and dump. Watch again the Wolf of Wall Street's pretty good on that. When you see this guy flying around his helicopter and doing all that kind of stuff, and where'd all that money come from? It's basically pump and dump. And the way a pump and dump works is you buy a position in a stock. If you're, say, some influencer or somebody who can hype this thing, then you get out there and spread the word that this is the next best thing, and everybody loves this stock. The price goes up and up artificially. And people being people, there's a concept of FOMO, fear of missing out. Everybody starts dumping money into it because they see the market going up. And then you, as a guy who are hyping it, you sell it all at the top, and all of a sudden you don't care, you don't hype it anymore, and all of a sudden the sentiment goes away, and the price goes back down to nothing. And all those people who bought on the way up are now left holding the bag. They get nothing, and you walked away with all the money. And whatever, it's a bit of a cliche. It just happens over and over again. The 9 out of 10 failures of the new startups in Silicon Valley there's some good things out there, but it takes some skill to pick the right ones. Cryptocurrencies. Is it the new gold? Who knows? The gold people, the gold bugs, as they call them, they've done quite well recently, and they've been vindicated to a certain extent. But holding it for the long haul, this buy the dip, this could be quite relevant. And if you're gonna get involved in crypto, maybe just be what they call a Bitcoin maximalist, just somebody who just has Bitcoin. The other stuff, meme coins, or there's some layer ones out there, and again, this is probably just foreign to some of you, but the Solanas, the Suis, the Ethereums, those, but they're still getting beat up right now, and there's a lot of people. If you use borrowed money to do this, there's almost no way you survived this last little retrenchment. But the potential, I do believe it's here to stay, because again, Wall Street has done quite well. The whole financial industry has done quite well with just sort of bogus charges and a lot of friction that have, given them some pretty cushy lifestyles when they can, sell stocks and hold on to your money for days, or Western Union can charge these transaction fees, and everybody's making a little percentage here or there, and then all of a sudden Bitcoin, I could send a Bitcoin to, somebody on a dirt street in Africa right now, and the transaction fees are almost, nothing. And the delay it's instantaneous. So it's going to be very disruptive in the financial world. And so that sort of potential, and now that it's been embraced by not only industry but also government, now people have got money involved. It's not going anywhere. Used to have these very predictable cycles. Okay, this is easy. Well, something happened in here. We got up, and then maybe we had a short cycle. Who knows? But this is the past couple months. So it stopped about 125, and now it's down. Maybe it's hit floor. I mean, these swings are not unusual. These big dips, you got to hold on for the ride. So they talk about when in doubt, zoom out. So if you're looking at over the past couple, whatever this is, 3 months back to June. If you're looking at over the course of just even 2022, this is not great, but you're still quite a bit up. I mean, based upon these cycles that I was showing you here, I jumped in at a position kind of down towards the low of this last cycle. So I'm just fine, but if I would have used leverage, borrowed money, we talked about how when using leverage, your collateral is actually the commodity. So it is the commodity. The commodity, the collateral, just took a beating. You got to add some more cash to it, and you're going to get crushed. You're going to get wrecked. So, real estate. So not everything's negative here. Real estate is a great thing, and real estate, for my mind, real estate in combination with the stock market is what you should try to do. Lots of advantages to real estate. Tangible asset, relatively safe. Again, you can't, like that M2 money supply where they're showing all this currency being created out of nothing. Nope, real estate is the real estate. There's not going to be a new supply. There's no new waterfront coming around. There's lots of land out there, but it does take a bit to develop it. In fact, I'm looking at some land right now. It's basically about $1 million to put a road in. It's quite expensive. So it does take a bit to develop stuff, but that's raw land if that's what you're looking at. But for regular, home real estate, residential real estate, that's kind of where most people invest. Commercial real estate, who knows? A lot of variables in there with AI and people telecommuting and just the nature of that. But and Amazon maybe detracting a little bit from retail space. So, but for homes, for apartments, for things like that, it's going to be pretty good. Lack of liquidity. You can't just flip this stuff that quickly. They talk about flipping real estate. Flipping real estate is done over the course of months typically. You have all these inspections. You have to find a seller, and then there's all sorts of exits for the seller to potentially get out. You're holding the asset, inherent and hedge from most inflation. This is where I was talking about the people that are holding assets. Inflation is almost their friend in terms of when things inflate, so do their assets. Potential to enhance your life. So the quality of life, just the ability to go out there and, live on one of your investments. Now that's the other thing though. People will talk about, oh, my house is worth so much now, I'm doing great. Well, can you sell it? Probably not, because you need a place to live. So if you've got real estate that's investments, that's even better. Having your house being worth more is nice. Having a extra piece of property that you're holding optionally that you don't have to live in, that's Outstanding. So when we talked about, how to get ahead and how to go from sort of this working, punching a clock and working for somebody else. When you're working for somebody else, they're only going to pay you, what they need to. They're never going to. Some people make fantastic salaries, from working from somebody else. Well, that's because that other person's making more from you than even they're paying you. I mean, otherwise they just wouldn't hire you. The benefits of working for yourself, and especially in current terms, some sort of side hustle even that maybe will develop into a full-time thing, is, if nothing else, it's good for your mental health. It gives you some sort of feeling of accomplishing something, hopefully, and it gives you a chance to maybe get involved in something you want. Now, one thing about this though, don't be naive. If somebody says, "Oh, I really love to bake, so I'm going to open up a bake place." Well, if that bakery happens to scale, you kind of hurt yourself a little bit, because if you're running the bakery, you got to run the bakery, which doesn't include probably getting out there and baking stuff. No, it's more of a personal management and compliance and paying taxes and all the lesser fun aspects. You're not actually, making the cupcakes or whatever. You're paying somebody else to do that. So, but it still is rewarding, and it still has the potential to, do quite well. Now, a lot of businesses fail, but a lot of people are idiots. I mean, it depends where you live. I don't live in Wasilla, but I'm close enough to see it, once a week or so. And you see these businesses being thrown up in these strip malls, and it's like, this will never go, there's probably not enough of a market for your little niche commodity. But if it's something that's relevant, or something you've identified, maybe there's some potential. But some of these businesses, you can just go, this will never work. But if it's the best way to do it is start small, make it something scalable, and test the market. If the market's there, then grow with it, and you'll do well. But anyway, when you're setting up a market, I'm not going to tell you, what sort of industry to try and set yourself up in, but I will sort of give you a little guidance on how to set up the business. And the worst case, the easiest and the most common, is the sole proprietorship. So you just simple, you open up Bob's whatever, and you just go, and you just get a business license and start chugging away. But if the business grows, or even if the business doesn't, it's all tied to you. And from a legal perspective, you're putting yourself at a lot of risk. You've got enough money now to where you start opening up this business, hopefully. Well, all that money is at risk because your liability primarily. You can get sued. Let's say you're just doing like some sort of painting business, and you got a ladder up on top of your van or your pickup or whatever, and you're going down the highway, and that ladder happens to come loose and flips into somebody's car. They're going to take everything. They're going to take that business. They're going to take your house. They're going to take it all, because you have unlimited liability. You and the business are one and the same. The business is not a separate entity. You are the person. And then it's going to be easy for taxes. It'll just be taxed as regular income. But, it's not unusual for a business to generate a fair amount of tax. It's going to be taxed at the personal rate, not the corporate rate. And anyway, but the reason why it's so common out there is because it's the easiest way to do it. It doesn't require a lawyer or any of that, but really, setting up an LLC doesn't require that either. So, but the main issue is the liability. Partnership, this just makes it a little bit worse, because now you just have two owners, so you're squabbling. It's not like it's even a marriage, and marriages don't do super well. Well, marriages, let's hope at least that people have something in common, some sort of fondness for one another. Business partners, probably not. And so the liability issues, you have to, again, I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer. Slightly different, but not the best. And then a corporation, there's a reason why, and this could be an LLC or for these kind of comparisons, not as much of a problem from a liability standpoint, because the corporation has basically personhood. It is the corporation. You are responsible for the amount of money you have invested in the corporation, but this corporation can go to court, can be sued. It lives beyond you. If you have this great painting business and you're going to pass it on to your children, and you just happen to die one day, if it's a sole proprietorship, the business died with you. In a legal sense, that business doesn't exist. It can't be passed on. A corporation, it's separate from you. It can be sold. It can be, gifted to your children. It can be whatever. And since it's an entity, it's not being closed out upon your death. If you've got a bunch of money, a bunch of assets in the sole proprietorship, and you die, everything needs to be settled right then. Those taxes on that business need to be paid right then. And they're probably going to lose it all. So, S Corp, I used to have an S Corp. Anyway, I had the tax lady. She did kind of great work, but she was a little sketchy. Go figure. And she passed away and left everybody hanging. And the IRS came in and clobbered us. But anyway, it was a little too complex for what I needed, and legal. It's just, if you need an S Corp, you can talk to your lawyer about it. You're kind of at that stage. I probably didn't actually need an S Corp. It was just overly complex. But an LLC, these are the babies. This is the one you want for most cases. It has those advantages of that corporation. Limited liability, avoids lawsuits, taxes a partnership, so it's not taxed at your personal rate, and very flexible, unlimited number of shareholders. So if you wonder why there's so many LLCs out there, that's because that is the business form. It's not that hard to do. You go right now, and in the time it takes me to tell you about it, you could go on the Alaska Department of Commerce site, get a name for a corporation, make sure there's no conflicts in terms of somebody else using that other name. I think it's $250. Pay your little fee, bada bing. If you get a document right then, you print it out, you're an LLC. You can get a tax ID for that corporation, just another online thing. IRS sends you a number. You're legal, you're a corporation, and you can't get sued nearly as easily. So, I'll kind of go through and recap some of this now that I've given you an overview. Owner operated by one person. You're so focused on the business, and it's typically services, that you're keeping it simple. Fewer than 50 people. 3/4, because people are lazy. It's not because they're great. It has so many downfalls, but it's so easy to start up. I don't know about the last statement. Could be a problem. That's because if discrimination is going to take place, it's quite easy to identify the owner. Whereas as a corporation, they don't know who's the person. I don't know. That's kind of a crazy statement. Okay, comparison of sole proprietorships. So this is the numbers, right? But not the wealth. Corporations, C corporations, these are the ones with shareholders and the rest of it. Partnerships, S corporations. Sole proprietorships, yeah. Owner keeps all the profits. Flexibility, certainly. Regulations, minimal. Tax at individual rate, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. Probably a bad thing if you're actually making money, because that's going to be a whole lot higher. If you're getting taxed, up in the 30s, and the tax rate for corporations is down in the 20s, that's not good. Easily dissolved, very easily. You've got 100% control. It can be involuntarily dissolved, though, by you dying. Businesses realize that you're kind of not really serious. You would have done the research. You probably wouldn't be a sole proprietorship. So when you go to get them funding, you're like, they're not going to probably take you all that serious. The owner's responsible for everything, tied to the owner. Higher taxation rate. Yep. Partnership. Some advantages, but again, sometimes you see these in law practices, maybe a dental practice, something like that. Not that common. So you may be involved in investment schemes, and I mean scheme more like in the British sense. And in UK, it doesn't have such a pejorative term. If you say, "Hey, I've got a scheme I want you to get involved in," people think it's something shady. In the UK, they say scheme like it's a proposition. But anyway, general partner, limited partnership. I've been involved in real estate investments, and they'll say, okay, you're going to be a limited partner. Well, if they say that, make sure you remain that way. Limited partner means you can't be involved in like the day-to-day management. And you can't, jump in and correct things that you see are screwed up. In return for that, you don't have this unlimited liability. So, and the question is that in the case I was a limited partnership, I was very happy to be that way. I invested like $10,000 in a real estate deal, and that company wasn't good, and I lost all $10,000, which sounds bad, but it could have been so much worse. If I would have been a general partner, I could have lost more than the amount I had invested, because if I would have crossed that line. As a limited partner, I could only lose up to the extent that I invested. As a general partner, it's like a sole proprietor. If you go into debt, you can't go into debt. In a limited partner, you can only lose the money you've got invested. Anyway, a little more complex. Easy to organize, yep. Another person, I guess. Swift decision making. The further you get away from, as you get more partners, if you have like some sort of committee, things go horrible. I used to take a course on organizational management, and I used to use it was an old book prepared by the OSS, the Office of Strategic Studies, which is the forerunner to the CIA, and it was called Simple Sabotage, and it talked about how, in some sort of wartime scenario, because this was written back in World War II, if you're in some forced labor scenario, your country is taken over by some foreign entity, and you want to sabotage that, that people who have taken you over, these are the ways to do it, and so it had really cool stuff about how to mess up machinery but it had a whole section on organizations. And it talked about how to absolutely ruin an organization. And sure enough, the primary means was, if you're given a position of power, make sure you form committees. Committees, will basically drag everything down, and make sure in a meeting, if there's a weaker member, make sure you defer to that person, and you stress that all opinions are of equal value, and it's, you don't have that decisive leadership. You don't have that sort of meritocracy that will allow an organization to survive. You have, no, let's find the weakest link and give all the power to that person. That person may have other skills, but if they don't have skills in business, that's your guy. That's the one you want running things, the one who's least competent to do it. Anyway, disadvantages of partnership. Yeah. Again, probably, if you're going to open a bakery, I do not envision you ever using a partnership, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Taxation on partnerships, it's slightly different, because anyway, it's not the individual rate, which is good. Corporations. So again, corporations, when we talk about corporations in terms of some of these tax benefits and other things, those would also apply to an LLC, a limited liability company. So assets or liabilities are separate from the owners. It's a separate entity. You can sell these things. The corporation can sign a contract, can sue and be sued. So even though they're not the biggest in numbers, they're the biggest in terms of sales and income, because that's where smart companies, that's how they go. If a corporation has stocks and dividends, yep, So, you can sell shares in the corporation, and then profits that aren't reinvested in the corporation can be distributed to the stockholders. Creating, again, a little bit of power is a dangerous thing. The first time I tried to create an LLC, this was many years ago on the Alaska website, I went to the wrong thing, and sure enough, I created a C corporation, and I just, pissed away $250 because I had to redo the whole thing. Not a big deal. No lawyers involved. I kind of realized within a few days what I'd done, and I went back and whatever. I created some extra paperwork for the state, but they were compensated. The stupid $250 penalty charge. But yeah, you can create a C-class corporation quite easily. You can also incorporate in other states, which might be a warning sign sometimes. If you're seeing that you're dealing with a Delaware corporation or another corporation, let's say you're maybe not doing something shady, but you've got kind of a personal life and you want it to remain that way, and you don't want to reveal a bunch of details, you can have basically an anonymous corporation. I believe it's Wyoming, where you can incorporate. You don't have to reveal who the owners are. So that's kind of interesting. But anyway, different states. But if it's a Delaware corporation, Delaware is very business friendly, not friendly to the consumer. So if you're doing something where you think you might get sued, incorporating in Delaware is, but again, you'd have to justify the expense of having to go litigate everything in Delaware. But if you see a Delaware corporation, they're probably there not because they're kind of worried about getting sued, and they want to be in a favorable court if that happens. Yeah, this is getting beyond what we need to talk about. But again, you can do a pseudo. And when they say foreign, since corporations are chartered by the state, it doesn't necessarily mean foreign. We're talking a different state. If I incorporate in Wyoming for some sort of confidentiality, privacy concerns, and I come and I operate in the state of Alaska, I'm a foreign corporation. Who cares? Most people doing business, they don't say, "Hey, where's this business actually oriented?" So you can do that. Private corporation. So there's some companies like you say, "Wow, I've had drones for years, not like geeky kind of whatever. I'm going to go out and fly with my little drone buddies and call myself a pilot." No, I mean like you're going to go out and look at some real estate and do some cool stuff with it. I find it quite useful, especially on vacations and stuff. It's just you get the best pictures you ever wanted. But so if I want to invest in, say, DJI, it's a drone manufacturer that's kind of got the market cornered. Or probably a more relevant case would be something like Starlink, all the stuff that Elon Musk does. That's not done under Tesla. That's done under Starlink. Well, if you want to invest in Starlink, I think Starlink is still private. It may go public at a certain point, but right now it's a private corporation where you can't buy shares in it because they're not selling them. They're not giving up any of their interest. Now, at a certain point, they may say, okay, we've gotten big enough where we're going to take it away from these original venture capitalist people, and now we're going to make it a big public corporation. And so they'll do an IPO, initial public offering, and that's where they get these. They have lawyers and specialists on this. They divide it up into shares, and then they sell that stock to the public, and they estimate what the market will pay for that stock. And so that's kind of a big who knows, But anyway, it goes public, and kind of cool. Could be a chance to make some money, but you may not find yourself in a preferential position in terms of getting access to those IPO shares on the day one. They may already have been sold to some other investor, and you're buying them from there. So you're actually in the secondary market on the first day. So. Public corporations, yeah. So, again, beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But, yeah, you can have corporations owned and operated by the government. So, some of the big mortgage, Fannie, Freddie Mac, stuff like that are corporations that are by their charters and stuff. They're owned by the government. Board of directors, yeah, beyond what we're talking about. Applies to C corporations. Preferred stock, we talked a little about stock back in the day. Preferred stock has always been a kind of a do not care kind of item for me because, holding preferred stock sounds advantageous, and it is to a certain extent, but it's usually not relevant. Number one, preferred stock means when they're paying dividends, which means they're probably a more established corporation. They're not necessarily expanding rapidly, so they're paying the dividends back to companies. So that's typically not the kind of companies that I get involved in. I like higher growth companies that are expanding rapidly and using all their profits for expansion. But let's say this company is an older established company and they're paying a dividend, and all of a sudden they get to a point because of economic times or whatever, or just not doing well, they can't pay the dividend. Well, those who hold preferred stock would still get access to the dividend if a dividend's to be paid at all, and the people with common stock would not. Yeah. It's still indicative of a company that for some reason was paying a dividend, now is not. Sounds like they're on a downward trajectory. It's not a company I want to be involved in, so not a big deal. Yep. Common stock, yeah, whatever. I get these proxy letters all the time. It's not necessarily a democracy. If one share equals one vote. And so as a retail investor, I'm not exactly a big player in this. When I've got, 10 shares of whatever company and somebody else has got 1 million shares, it's not even going to justify the postage for the most part. I usually skip that. Manages corporations, so this is it. Limited liability. Propensity to get sued is probably, lawyers, you get wronged by a company, you go, I'm going to get a lawyer, I'm going to sue. Well, unless you're going to pay for that lawyer out of pocket, if they're reliant on the settlement you're going to get, they're not taking the case if it's against an LLC, because probably not enough money to be had unless something very egregious was done. So, ease of transfer, yep, it's not tied to you personally. It's a separate entity that can be bought and sold, and it continues on. It's got its own personhood, its own life. You've shown that you're kind of serious in setting this thing up. You've shown that it's got a perpetual life. You're not at risk of being sued into oblivion. Yeah, so it represents a more attractive entity to lend money to. And you expand, it's definitely scalable. Disadvantages. So the corporation is taxed on the profits, and then those profits, if you're an owner of a corporation, you sell those shares, you get those dividends. Well, again, they get taxed again. So that can be a double taxation, but depends on the rate. Now, again, you can avoid some of these double taxation things and this would be why you might end up in an S corp or something like that. Expensive to form. A C class is expensive to form. An LLC, $250, which in the grand scheme of things is not very expensive compared to the liability that you're basically being relieved of. Yep. Owners, managers, sure, that's true with anything now. Joint ventures, a bit beyond. S corp. So this S corp, again, the double taxation kind of goes away. Again, beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. Can be popular, if you're scaling, you got that kind of money to find somebody smarter than me to advise you on that. But I can just tell you, yeah, there are certain advantages when you're getting up in that realm. LLC, nice, easy, best blend of characteristics. So, cooperative. No, I'm a farmer, but some of you guys, cooperatives are quite popular sometimes in agricultural entities, but again, beyond the scope of this course. So, now we're going to talk about real estate. Real estate is, let me pause for just a second. We're getting a whole new section here. So, real estate. Okay, so I've talked a bit about the advantages of real estate, and now I want to kind of go through the transaction. I did sell real estate for a little bit. It's not a bad gig, but not my gig, that's for sure. If you were going to go and do one thing and do it well, real estate might be the thing. That's just not my personality. I was, doing other stuff, active in my family. I was working for another big corporation, and I didn't want to let that one go. Anyway, if you're going to apply yourself in real estate, you kind of got to make it your life, which people do, the successful ones. There's probably maybe 3 to 5% of the people that sell about 95% of the property. And there's a whole lot of other people who just hold a license and just sort of dabble in it, and they never reach critical mass. The way you make money if you're going to be selling real estate is to get those return clients and all of that, and really get out there, and it's all marketing. Anyway, that's from a career aspect. Where most of us are going to be involved is just purchasing property. So when I'm talking about this, I'm just talking about what I've always bought and sold real estate, and then I, had a license. It's just lapsed now, but I'll go through kind of the aspects of it. First thing, searching for a home. Don't start searching until you get the pre-approval. You have to pay for a credit check, so it's about $50, but you're going to have to pay for that anyway. It may be more than that now, but if you're serious about buying a home during the loan process, you would have to get this approval. And the reason why you want to get pre-approval is because you want to know, you may think, oh, I can afford that or I can't afford that. Well, you're just guessing until you actually go in there and talk to a mortgage broker and find out and look at the things you're looking at. And then if say they say no, you can't get that home that you want, well, maybe you can take some steps to qualify. You can figure out what the problem is, why they don't look at you as an attractive candidate for a loan. So, but the other thing about pre-approval is usually it doesn't hurt to use an agent. I mean, it doesn't hurt, and what I mean is financially, since the person selling the home pays the commission. You as the buyer, there's really not a lot of downside in using an agent because you're not paying them. They get paid by the seller. So you want the best in terms of that person who's selling it to you. And if even I was a schlub in terms of the big real estate world, but I wouldn't take somebody who doesn't have a pre-approval. They're not very serious about it. And that couple, 3 to 5% real estate, the people that you want, the people that know what they're doing, they're definitely not going to take you as a client. They're way too busy to mess with somebody who doesn't know. I mean, the problem is if I spend time and I go out and show you homes and do all this research for you, and then you go in and get your approval and you get disqualified, or another bad scenario is you find out, oh, you've been looking for $300,000 homes and you can actually afford $500,000, so we just waste our time. So you do the pre-approval, figure it out. Location is all important on real estate, where it is. And again, look at it from big picture. Look upon it. You're buying a home as if you want to sell it. You may have every intention to stay in this home for 20 years, but that's not how you got to look at it. You got to look at it as, if I needed to sell it, in a few weeks, is this a good deal in a desirable location? Oh, I don't have kids, I don't care about schools. Yes, you do care about schools, because other potential buyers are going to care about schools. So anyway, licensee, real estate agent. Alaska is full of Alaska, for being a small state population-wise, has got an incredible amount of corruption. The reason why people in Alaska call themselves licensees instead of agents is because they have to, because they misrepresented themselves. Some of the swindles and different things that have been done, it's just outsize of the state. Anyway, the other thing about it is, Zillow online service, they may get better, but right now, Alaska's a non-disclosure state. Real estate people are not in that much threat of being replaced by some online thing. Before I came up here, I was in Europe and I was looking at property. I had some nice things I had chosen for myself, and I got up here and I met with the agent, and sure enough, we went and looked at one, and it was like, a lot of property, but right in an avalanche zone. Another one was way over on Highland Drive in Eagle River, which isn't bad, but the fact that you don't get sun but a couple months out of the year is kind of a downside that didn't quite translate in Zillow and everything else. So do yourself a favor, find somebody who can help you out. You may know the area well, but it doesn't hurt to get a second opinion. Disclosure review: when you're buying a home, another reason to perhaps use an agent is the fact that their livelihood's kind of on the line here. Because of the little corruption that exists just below the surface, some people have done some shady things, as I said, and the courts will clobber a real estate licensee quite aggressively, and so sellers need to disclose facts like, oh, the roof leaks or this leaks, and if there's an agent involved, the agent would usually insist that disclosure is done thoroughly and everything else, because they're on the line if it's not. Where if it's like for sale by owner, you might be able to get screwed on that one. Homeowners associations, I hate them. I hate them with a passion. But whatever they do have a purpose. If you're living in a neighborhood and somebody wants to, especially in Alaska, I don't know what the propensity is for people to want to accumulate junk, but if they want to put 4 old cars in their front yard and you don't have an HOA, you don't have much to say about it. So, but that'll be part of the disclosure as well. Those documents, you'll read them. But anyway, this whole disclosure process is kind of critical. Appraisal kind of comes after the fact. The transition's kind of being already in motion. Everybody wants to happen. My problem with appraisals are that the appraiser, he has access to the information about how much you are offering for the home. So people go, oh, I put in an offer for this home for $300,000. I hope it appraises for that. And then they're like, wow, I'm pretty skillful. The appraisal came right back at $300,000. Wow, he's got this exact same opinion I do. Nah, he's, all things being equal, things are going to appraise for what the price is. Because the appraisal is a, sort of a estimation of the market value of the home. Well, if you're offering $300,000 for it, that's way better than an estimate. That's somebody actually offering that kind of money. So, I mean, it is legitimate, but these things are not going to save you. If you offer $500,000 on a home that maybe only was worth $300,000, don't expect the appraisal to save you. It may come right through at $500,000, because clearly the appraiser's like, wow, I thought it was only worth $300,000, but obviously somebody's willing to pay $500,000, so $500,000 it is. There you go. Inspections. This has taken on a new, I guess the big earthquake we had a few years ago isn't that current anymore, but some of that damage does linger, and some of these guys that are inspectors, when I was a salesperson, there were certain inspectors you didn't want to use, because those guys some of them were just anal and would find little stupid things that didn't, add up or weren't relevant. But then there's other people who are just sort of oblivious and miss the big stuff. So I've hired like engineer type structural engineer type people. There are some out there that do the inspections, because if there's earthquake damage, you're kind of screwed. If there's problems with the structure, the bones of the house, the curtains, and the fact that an outlet's missing a wire or something, you can remedy that. But structural concerns, damage, that can be a real problem. Yeah, but anyway, you'd assess where you are in the situation. It's like, yeah, this person is, you'd have a buyer who's kind of nervous. And you say, yeah, I want to get that, inspector that's got the seeing eye dog, who's probably not quite that in depth. Otherwise, these people are going to get spooked. But if I've got somebody else who's wants to be very meticulous, well, those inspectors are available. But again, the stuff I'm buying is usually something where I do want an engineer. I'm not going to, panic if they say this thing's screwed up and why would you want this? Yeah, I want it because it's priced at where I want it to be. And the reason why it's priced there is because of perhaps some defect that, as long as it's known, that's fine. Loan approval. So you've already got your credit history. This part should go fairly quick. Now you're trying to lock in an interest rate. So interest rates it's a two-edged sword. If interest rates are low, that means there's less of a barrier to entry to home ownership. So there's a lot more people in the market, so prices can go up. My daughter recently bought a house. She's a student, also she's already a nurse, but she's working on her doctorate. But anyway, she bought a house in Salt Lake, and she bought it when interest rates were quite high. And hopefully her and her husband will be able to refinance. But even though the prices were high, they probably would have been higher if interest rates were lower, because there would have been more people in the market. Final walkthrough. The ship has kind of sailed. You're still looking for things, though, that may not be, the problem I found most of the time in the final walkthrough is you'll find some sort of discrepancy. Like I was purchasing a house and the bathroom floor was kind of jacked up, and they said, oh, we're going to replace that. And so I go through there like the day or two before the closing, and they're replacing it. They're putting in some crappy composite, floor tile stuff. I'm like, whoa. Now this was hardwood. It needs to be hardwood. Oh, well, we didn't know you wanted that. Well, obviously they probably could have assumed I wanted it back, but if I wouldn't have caught it, I would have been stuck. So, important to do. And then the closing. The thing about the closing is it shouldn't be this huge dramatic event. You should have had all the other documents. In fact, you're required to have them a couple days before. If you go in there closing kind of blind, they're going to start throwing all these documents at you. You don't have a chance to read them. You got your little closing appointments about 20 minutes, half hour, and you're just blindly signing stuff like it's some, end user license agreement for some internet software. The downside of the internet software isn't huge, but the downside to this is huge. So get those documents and read through them, and probably you may need to get some assistance on interpreting them. So allow yourself as much time as possible. And then when you do go into the closing, it's just a review of stuff you've already seen. Term project. So some of you are probably coming to grips with this now. You've got the information out there. It's kind of almost a checklist item. Keep it a flowing document, but go through and kind of set yourself up for a plan. Now make it relevant and useful to yourself. I mean, this is a great opportunity. Grading wise, if I think it's just, slop and some generic AI garbage, yeah, that's not gonna be something you're looking for. But if it's a plan that's tailored to your specific situation, and again, you can use whatever name or whatever you want. I don't want all your personal data, but if you can be more specific in terms of the situation that you're developing this plan for, the better it is. So in order to maintain its relevancy, this isn't for if you're still in college or not quite immersed in your career yet. Your financial plan for your whatever your little on the side job is probably not going to be very useful to you. What you'd want to do in that case, and this is what I kind of highlight in the description of the term paper, is push sort of your time frame forward to a point where you're actually going to be in your sort of forever type job, where you're going to be actually working full time and starting to, put on your big boy pants and grow up in the financial world. And so there's certain things you're going to have to address in terms of how you're going to get things done, in terms of how you're going to manage your finances and, do your budgeting type stuff. And you don't need necessarily a written budget, but you do need an idea of how much you can afford for rent, how much you can afford for a vehicle, what your long-term goals are. And so the goal of the term paper is to sort of look at all those items and come up with a plan. Now, it's not going to be an exact plan because in most cases you're forecasting your future, and so obviously a forecast is only a guess, educated guess, but a guess just the same in terms of how your life's going to turn out. And so, children may or may not be part of it, whatever. But just pick one, pick a choice. Oh, plan on having, a couple children. Boom. Okay, so now that kind of gets you into, plan on saving money for their college. And this is going to be the plan to do it. And I'm going to use a 529, or I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to try and set this amount of money aside, and this is going to be my retirement savings and my long-term investment savings. Or these are the type of things I'm looking at. This is what I'm considering for health care. So all those different things, just go through and address them all, and maybe it'll be something that's useful to you in the future, or at least when you're presented with these decisions or these alternatives at a future date, you'll at least have thought about them before, and you can make a better guess. So the final exam prep, there will be another video. It'll go through everything on the course, kind of get you ready for what you need to do in the exam. Kind of scale things back, give you a chance to work on your term paper, like I say. And so I'm putting this out here. The tail end here of the semester, as it kind of winds down, I kind of advise you to, obviously do well on the test, but the video will help with that. But really put some time into the term paper and kind of put together what you've, kind of studied in this course and some of the resources you've kind of been presented to. And again, if you're having trouble getting started in this paper, look at a lot of those big brokerage sites. You don't have to have some sort of relationship business set up with those guys just to look at the sites and use some of their planners, and kind of get you pointed in the right direction. If you're still having trouble, or even if you're not having a whole lot of trouble, you can send me a copy of your term paper, and I can kind of look at it and tell you what needs to be improved, and then send it back to you, and then you write the term paper. Like I say, if you don't get an A on the term paper, that's on you. You have the opportunity to get an A on the term paper, and you'll get an A on the term paper if you have the sufficient length, you address the concerns, and you make it tailored to a specific situation, just not generalist kind of garbage. Anyway, good luck with that.